LSU linebacker slash edge rusher Harold Perkins. Is he the next Micah Parsons? We're going to talk about that and more coming up next.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Locked On family? Welcome back to the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, your daily podcast covering your favorite draft prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your boy, Damian Parson, always on the ones and twos. You can find and follow me on X at DP_NFL. I'm a senior draft analyst, and thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day. Shot for being our everydayers. You know, I got to kick this intro to Mr. LSU himself, Keith Sanchez. You can find and follow him on X at The Talent Code. Keep talk to him, baby.
What's up, Locked On family? Let's get locked in. This is Keith Sanchez, 2019 national champ, man. And what the other side to this dynamic duo that we like to call the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. I want to start this podcast off. Like always, I want to say shout out to our everydayers. Thank you for tapping in with us each and every single day. DP, we are deep into the scouting notebook, and I have one of my guys, man, Mr. LSU, Harold Perkins himself. We're going to jump into that. The comparison is he the next Micah Parsons, right? Yeah, we're going to have that conversation. Then we're going to stay in the SEC, bring up Georgia edge rusher, Mr. Mykel Williams, and wrap this thing up with Mr. Explosiveness himself, Mr. National Champ himself, running back from Michigan, Donovan Edwards. DP, before we get this thing started, man, why don't you hit him with our title sponsor?
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Keith, right in your neck of the woods, man. Harold Perkins started out with your Tigers as a freshman as a edge rusher. Listed at 6'1", 220. And for the last year, right? Last year, I think it was last year, where he took that jump or took that step and they put him at off-ball backer. When you look at his game compared to a Micah Parsons, what kind of similarities do you see, and what did the tape show you for Harold Perkins? Is this guy going to end up being a first-round pick if he stays at linebacker, Keith? Because numbers-wise from last year, 74 tackles, 40 total pressure, 6.5 sacks. He wasn't bad. He had a pretty solid statistical season as kind of a do-it-all backer / edge hybrid. But when you looked at the tape, how do you feel about Harold Perkins' NFL future?
Yeah, DP, to answer the question, man, it's a lot to take in. And thank God that the scouting process it's a long process at the end of the day, right? Like we get multiple credit at watching guys, evaluating them, and then also that he has another year to see what's the ceiling, right, and identifying the floor for this guy. Because let's just talk about what's on film, right? And what's on film is you're going to understand that this is a versatile alignment defender, right? He's going to play some edge. They're going to mug him up in the A-gap. They're going to drop him in coverage. He's going to work the curler flat. He's going to work the deep middle. Like it's a lot that they ask him to do in man, right? If the wide receiver goes in motion, he's running with him in motion, right? So there's a lot that you ask him to do. And I think the conversation is it should start, because I think the sacks obviously a very good thing, right? Like he sack production, and I'll talk about that. As an edge rusher, you put him in one-on-one situations. He's nimble, fluid, smooth, quick enough to get under offensive tackles, to beat them with first step quickness, right? To be disruptive in that way when you're talking about, I want to say clean opportunities. And what I'm saying is that there are opportunities where, as an edge rusher, you kind of have to fight through traffic sometimes, right? Whether that's, just the bunch sets, right? So you're not in a close alignment. You're in a, more of a wide nine type of situation. And then there are also times where you may get chipped on the way out, right? And so those things, they may take away from Harold Perkins' ability to impact the game as a pass rusher. But when he's in straight up one-on-one situations with an offensive tackle, DP, he can get after it. And like I said, you see the first step explosiveness. You see the natural ability to rush the passer via quickness and just using his raw athleticism and being a mismatch for offensive tackles who don't have the foot speed. Now, the question is this: is that when you're scheming for Harold Perkins, right? can you potentially scheme him out of certain situations? And then now he has to go to other situations. And we always talk about this, and I talked about this for all last year. I believe with edge rushers, you have to have a power element to your game. And I went back and looked at certain edge rushers that came out. So I don't think Micah Parsons is the comparison, because Harold is listed as 6'1", 220, right? Micah is 6'3", 250. Like we talking about two different, you know what I'm saying, two different people. But maybe you're looking at this in context of a Bruce Irvin. Now the question is, when he was drafted. But the question would be, would people draft Bruce Irvin again in the first round?
Yeah, that's a good point, especially with, hindsight 2020. Like Bruce Irvin was a productive NFL player, and I like and now I think about it, stylistically, body type wise, they are very similar, him and Harold Perkins. And like you said, with people now seeing how Bruce Irvin's career, finished out, would you still select him round one? Right? I think he was if I remember correctly, I believe the Seattle Seahawks defense won the title while he was there, and he was he's an integral part of that pass rush, and bringing a different style opposite of Michael Bennett, I think it was on one side, and they had some of the bigger kind of true defensive ends, and he was that kind of fastball off the edge. So no, I like that, and it's like you said, Keith. Like I like how you painted that clean opportunities. Because when you see him one-on-one and he gets to get that tackle on the island, like you see why he was a highly touted recruit, why he was so successful as a pass rusher as a freshman, right? I think he had like 9.5 sacks or 9 sacks as a freshman, right? That first step quickness, the explosiveness, but also that bend, that fluid hips to get up and under, like you said, the hands and punches of tackles. I think and it's crazy because I wonder if he stayed at edge, that 3-4 teams or odd front teams would have been more inclined to have him as he'd be perfect for us because we run odd front. We got a bunch of big bodies alongside him. He's flanking on the outside, stuff like that. But if he's going to put the move to linebacker, it's all about his development at linebacker to determine how high he will go and how good he can be, because if we feel like, all right, he's not seeing it well, he's not seeing it quickly, he's not processing and different things like that. And at 6'1", 220, he's kind of, as a linebacker, height-wise, he's or size-wise, he's like that Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., near that type of size and frame. So I wonder, Keith, you tell me, like, how far does he have to develop from at the linebacker position to see a high draft, to be selected high or selecting the first round period? Because playing that tweener can get a little muddy.
Yeah, I think you want to, if you draft him as a pure linebacker, he's probably your weak side linebacker, and potentially in a 4-3 scheme. And then you allow him to play in space, and he triggers that curler flat. He runs vertical with defenders, things like that. You talk about the 3-4 inside linebacker scheme. That's a little bit more difficult because then now you're reading the nose tackle that's two gapping. You're trying to figure out the strength of the defense. It's a little bit. I don't want to say more complex, right? But it takes a different skill set to be a 3-4 inside linebacker versus playing, right? And then just being a weak side linebacker. Or maybe you could potentially put him as a Sam if you feel like you can put 235, 240 pounds. Now, putting him as the edge rusher situation is the thing. There's two sides to this, right? There's the pass rushing ability, but then there's also the ability to hold up against the run. Now, what do you do if coordinators are like, hey, you get to the NFL, you get the Arthur Smiths, you get, some of these teams that love running the football, and they're like, we're just going to run the rock, man. We're just going to tote the rock, and we're going to run you away, and then force you to go from outside linebacker to probably have to play in the stack backer position. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation, DP. I promise you this is just the beginning of what is going to come as far as the conversation for Harold Perkins. But like I said, I very talented player. But you think of some of the names, and you want to throw out comparisons, and you could throw out good, and you could throw out a couple concerning type of player comparisons to be able to move forward. But DP, let's keep this thing going, man. I didn't do just one SEC guy. I did two. I went to Georgia, man, and I did interior defensive lineman / edge, Mr. Mykel Williams. You're gonna have a conversation about him coming up next.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Guys, summertime can mean a lot of different things, but what it really does mean, baseball, the NBA Finals, and so much more. And you can bet on it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Guys, with any winning $5 bet, new customers right now get $200 back in bonus bets. That's $200 you get at your disposal to bet on everything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Speaking of Finals MVP, on the FanDuel Sportsbook app right now, Jason Tatum is leading the MVP votes right now ahead of Jaylen Brown, Luka Doncic, and Kristaps Porzingis. You talk about Zaz is plus 115. Listen, so you can go ahead and make those type of bets right about now. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Georgia defensive end edge rusher Mykel Williams. This is at 6'5", 265 pounds. Keith claiming, off the season of 2023, accounted for 16 total tackles, 46 total pressures and hurries combined, and 4.5 sacks. Keith, I want to ask you, is he similar to Travon Walker when Travon was at Georgia in terms of not being that definitive edge rusher, more of a movement tweener edge, 3-tech, 5-tech, things of that nature? We're watching, in the NFL, we're watching Travon come into his own last year living on the edge and finding his success. But when you look at Mykel Williams, is he similar to Travon? And how much more development does this young man need? Because he's physically gifted and he has the build, the size, the strength, the arm length. He has all the things that coaches want. But how far away is he from being a finished product?
Yeah, DP, I feel like you asked that question because you may have watched a little Mykel Williams.
A little bit.
That made looking at him, I think when you just look at it, like, I guess comparing apples to apples, right, with him and Travon Walker. Travon Walker is probably more stronger at the point of attack, but I think this guy may be a more fluid player. I think he's a little bit looser in the hips. Now, the thing is this, that you list him at edge, but he's reduced inside a lot, right? Whether they go even fronts, odd fronts, they do a bunch of different things. Obviously, we know Georgia has athletes all over the place. So they putting guys in advantageous situations, right? What I like about Mykel is that he has a nice combination of everything, a nice combination of size, a nice combination of athleticism. That you see some power to his game. You see some finesse as far as him being able to, use speed to win, right? And I think the thing is, how they say that you could be a jack of all trades and a master of none. That is kind of going to be the conversation of Mykel Williams, right? Is what is your calling card, and do you live in the area of where you do a lot of really good things, but what is the great thing that's done that's going to put you over the top to be a consistently dominant player in the NFL? But that's the question heading into his junior year, right? Like, what does he identify? What does he go to? What does he develop at? But I like him as a prospect. I would give him a first-round grade just off the hook, because you're talking about if 6'5", 260, fluid mover, versatile front guy. This interior defensive line class is shaping out to be pretty doggone good. And with that being the case, Mykel Williams could be one of those guys that we hear round one, because like we say, even in the first round, we know that they're usually on 32 first-round prospects. Obviously, just like offensive tackles, right? There's a premium on defensive linemen, especially defensive linemen that can be versatile in what they do.
No, I agree with you, and that's why, I wanted to ask about the Travon Walker thing, because when I first time when you really look at him and see his build, you're like, man, he does resemble Travon Walker a little bit, being that big, long arm, well-rounded in terms of his frame, well-filled in body type. And I can't remember. I think it was. I remember just from watching them during the pre-draft process for 2024 and watching some of the guys I had in my region, like Spencer Rattler and, Xavier Legette and different guys from the SEC that I had this past draft. And I believe it was South Carolina where he just walked the right tackle into the dirt and got right in the face of he was in Spencer Rattler's face quite a bit in that game. You know what I mean, and made it very uncomfortable and everything like that. Now you see that ability similar to Travon too, is like what the Jags are doing with Travon is we're not just asking you to win the outside shoulder every single snap. No, we're gonna twist and stunt you and get you, running that interior path on a guard or a center at full speed where you can just convert speed to power. And I see that type of ability from Mykel as like, okay, if you're worried about his overall completion, right, in terms of him being a complete edge rusher right now, I still think there's a lot of room for him to grow in terms of just like, pass rush counters and different things like that. But, an easy way to get him really going is the same thing what the Jaguars are doing with Travon, similar to the rookie year for Aiden Hutchinson. We saw Detroit do that with him. Get him on a run path right onto interior offensive linemen, and you just use that speed to power, that strength. And I think Mykel is going to be able to do that. This is going to be a big year for him because when you look at this defense, he's the guy that people look at like, man, he's got to be the next one up, right? The Jalen Carters, Jordan Davis, Travon Walker, Nolan Smiths of the world, he's kind of fitting that kind of mold.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one guy I thought of, and because I think he like how he wins and his body type is very unique. With two guys that you hope that the ceiling becomes this, because we have to understand that he's a 260-pound plus potential edge guy, right? It's two guys that I thought of. I thought of Cameron Jordan, right? The guy, New Orleans Saints edge rusher, who's been that, who wins with some power, who wins with some speed, nuanced guy. And I thought of Trey Hendrickson, DP, a guy that I really think highly of, but I looked at them from a body type comp, right? And then just a height weight type situation. And also the fact that Trey, I feel like, is versatile in what he does. You may want to look at him and be like, hey, can this guy play some interior defensive line for us? Can he play outside? Just does some different things. So I that's what you would hope the ceiling is for Mykel. And I would say this, I also, watching the film, I felt that there was more there. You know what I'm saying? Like more to be pulled out, and if he goes to a good situation to be developed. Like I think this guy, honestly, for the draft situation, I think this could be a player whose stock consistently rises. And then in the NFL, he gets developed the right way. He can take off and be a really good player.
As you were talking about comps, Keith, a name came to mind because I was trying to think about body types as well. Danielle Hunter, who was now with the Houston Texans, who was with the Minnesota Vikings, and he's listed at 6'5", 263. And even looking at Mykel just looking on, like when he's standing on the field, and then picturing Danielle just like pre-snap, him, or coming out the huddle, him just standing there, long arms, well built, tall, kind of long torso, but guys that really has that first step explosiveness, things like that. And Danielle Hunter's been one of the more underrated pass rushers in his career. Like he's been more than productive, even battling the injuries he's had. I think like when I think about potential comps of who he could be, if he hits that Danielle Hunter type of arc and stays healthy, Danielle Hunter came, 34 in the quarter on the arms, and he's been in the league. And crazy enough, like another SEC guy, he's an LSU guy. You know what I mean? Like if he could hit that, don't start. If he can hit that arc, Keith, I think that bodes for a very successful career, because a lot of people are excited for Danielle Hunter being in Houston now, opposite of Will Anderson. Now he's got himself a running mate to get out the quarterbacks with for the Texans, man. Yeah, thinking about like body type, athleticism, things of that nature, he reminds me a lot of one of your fellow Tigers, Danielle Hunter, over there with them Texans.
I don't mind that, DP. And like I said, we just scratching the surface, and I think that's the exciting part about the summer scouting, getting first eyes, and then understanding that we still have another year to go with these players and with these conversations. DP, let's wrap it up, man, with your playmaker, Mr. National Champ himself, the running back from Michigan, Donovan Edwards. And I want to know, does he compare to Jahmyr Gibbs at all? We're about to have this conversation coming up next.
Thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and everyday shot, for being our everydayers. Donovan Edwards, running back for those national champion Michigan Wolverines, and a guy that in 2023, it wasn't the best season for him, right? Because looking at what he did in 2022, really strong season, almost 1,000 yards rushing, and listed at 6'1", 210. So he has an NFL frame walking in right now. If those measurements stay of their correct and stay the same, he's coming off a season where he carried the ball 119 times, 497 yards for 5 total touchdowns, and that's mainly because Jim Harbaugh and that coaching staff, they ran Blake Corum, right? And I get it, that was your best offensive player, and they ran him literally like the entire season, where the year before it was more of a two-headed monster type of situation, especially close to that halfway point of the season. And then, of course, when Blake Corum went down, you guys remember he got hurt late in that season. I think it was the game before Ohio State. Maybe it was Penn State. Can't remember. But that's when you saw Donovan Edwards take off. And for me, when watching this tape, Keith, you said Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Alvin Kamara. Because when I look at him, this is a guy, and the things I wrote down in my notes on him, you got to get him the ball, right? He has good open field speed, really good open field speed. He can create explosive plays in the run game and the pass game. He's an outstanding receiving threat. Well, I think he still has more room to grow in that realm if they give him more opportunities, because the things he's already doing on tape, you're talking about lining up out wide against safeties. It was 2022, and like I said, he played more. He got more opportunities. I can't remember. I think it was against Rutgers. They threw a go ball to him. He had a couple fade routes on film where he's running past defenders and then tracking the ball and catching touchdowns. And I was just like, man, at 6'1", 210, you don't see that a lot with running backs lining up out wide. He lines up out wide. He lines up in the slot. He gets in bunch sets, but they also use him as a space player and manufacture touches. You're talking about jet sweeps and different things of that nature. Just getting the ball in his hands, it reminded me so much of Alvin Kamara, because that's the type of stuff that he does. It's not just lining me up and giving me the ball in standard handoffs 30 times. It's, bro, I can line up anywhere and hurt you from anywhere. And that's what I see with him.
I have a question. Just talking about what he provides, and you brought up the wide receiver conversation, and we get into these nuanced conversations on here, about roles and I guess positions that players play and what they provide. We're talking about a running back, but I thought about Deebo Samuel and I thought about Malachi Corley, and the reason I thought about those guys was, could he be I want to say the opposite version, but the running back version of what those guys are as wide receivers, meaning that this is a guy that you want to do the jet sweep handoffs with. You want to line him up at wide receiver. You can align him in the backfield to take handoffs, but if you like you said, just manufacturing touches, and usually for running backs, right, we were talking about it simply handing the football off, but if he can operate as an outside wide receiver, I think that's different in context, right? And then you're talking about putting them in orbit motions and then handing them the football. So I wonder, does he kind of push the needle forward just a little bit as far as being a offensive weapon more than just a running back or just a wide receiver, or even how we had Jahmyr Gibbs and we both felt like he was a running back, right? Wide receiver traits. Could this guy kind of move more to the middle, even more of that, right? To where he just an offensive player, he plays wide receiver, he plays running back. You just align him in different places. Like, can you see him like for the Jets, if you just say, hey, moving on, boom, or like the Dolphins, right? Like all of those teams that love that motion, and then he's that guy that consistently goes in motion, and he just has good contact balance because he is a running back and he's a strider.
Absolutely. I think he can, like you said, with you look at Bijan, you look at Gibbs, you look at Kamara, those guys just being weapons, right? Like, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying he should go as high as Bijan and Gibbs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But the same way we kind of looked at them as like, you know what? They can live on the field all 3 downs, and you're good with that. Like, you want them on the field all 3 downs. And I'm excited to see him in 2024, because this is his first year, Keith, guys, as the guy, as the dude for this run game. Like, he's the bell cow. He's RB1. And just to kind of bring some just like looking back at 2022, when Corum went down, right? So 2, 3, 4, like 5, his last 5 games, he had 4 100 plus yard games in his last 4 games in 2022. You know what I mean? Rutgers 109. Nebraska, he only had 2 carries. The offense didn't need to be on the field long against Nebraska. They won that game 34-3. So the starting offense wasn't on the field that much. But against Ohio State, 22 carries, 216, 2 rushing touchdowns. Against Purdue in the Big Ten championship game, 25 carries, $185, and the touchdown. Against TCU, we know that was kind of a mixed bag because he had a lot of success early with that 54-yard run, but he still had 119 yards rushing. Like when they fed him like a RB1, he produced like an RB1. And I think this is the year with this offense. He's scheme versatile. He can run zone concepts. He can run the gap stuff, whether it's between the tackles, just straight downhill, or the pin and pull, the counter plays, different things like that. This is a talented running back. I think the main thing I would say for him that I want to see improve when I looking at my notes, he has to get better with his vision. Vision wise, I feel like he doesn't see cutback lanes quick enough. He runs into the back of his offensive lineman at times on some of those gap scheme type of runs where he, especially last year, I saw a decent amount. And I think that's also because he's not getting the ball a lot. So the feel and flow of the game, he's not in tune with or tapped in with because he's barely on the field. But yeah, I want to say a consistency grow with his vision to have that peripheral vision, see that cutback lane, plant his foot. Because when he's in the rhythm, you start to see it. But it's just last year was very inconsistent for him because of his inconsistent play time, snap share. But also, he, as good as he is in open field as like a space player, he's one of those running backs where I didn't see enough creativity and elusiveness. Where when you're one-on-one with a guy in the phone booth, make a miss and get that extra 60.
Yeah, there's kind of some tightness, and you kind of he kind of operates better in a straight line, right? And that's why just like the jet motion stuff, and like really to just be able to get him going and on the perimeters, because I do think he's a good running back. But from what I've seen, it's the if there's backfield penetration, right, or he has to navigate really small cracks, that's not necessarily him. He wants to get his pass north and south and get vertical. So I think he's gonna be a very interesting prospect, and I think, like I said, there's going to be an element of what he's able to push forward, right, or just push in a different direction as classify a running back, and then also how you want to use them in the NFL. So it'd definitely be a fun conversation. But DP, we talking about the scouting notebook, man. That wraps up another episode of the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, man. I want to say shout out to everydayers. Thank you for tapping in with us each and every single day, man. Listen, I am Keith Sanchez. You can find me on X at The Talent Code. That right there is my guy, my co-host, Mr. Damian Parsons, man. And you can find him on X at DP_NFL. Like we always like to say, man, y'all come talk to us because we like to talk back.
Go subscribe and follow for free on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts, to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. Thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today and every day. Shout out for being our everydayers. On tomorrow's episode, we're going through wide receivers. Luther Burden, is he wide receiver 1? Got to talk about Will Shepherd going from the SEC to Colorado. And then I have a surprise name that nobody's really talking about. So come and join the conversation again tomorrow on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.